Good morning, everyone. My name is Mahée-Ly. I'm a master candidate in the completion of the research project, and the project is in collaboration with the Oujé-Bougoumou Cris Nation. In Quebec, the First Nations always had conflicts with the forestry sector because of its impacts on the environment and on their way of life. Despite the harmonization and everything that's been done to improve relations, conflicts persist, leading to what we know today: blocked logging roads, moratoria, territorial disputes, and so on. Despite these circumstances, some communities want to do an acceptable forestry to meet their needs. For example, potential development opportunities in Wemontashi and Waswanipi, biomass needs in Oujé-Bougoumou, forestry activities provide jobs in Mistassini and Opichua. Authorities who want to engage in such activities should also ask themselves how to go about making acceptable forestry in their community. Additionally, what can they do to grant their members social license to operate? There's no exact definition of the concept, but here's one from Moffat et al. The ongoing acceptance or approval of an operation by those local community stakeholders who are affected by it, and those stakeholders who can affect its profitability. In fact, just because a community decides to do forestry doesn't mean that users are all happy about certain practices. For Oujé-Bougoumou, the community is looking into the possibility of forestry to meet its biomass needs. Oujé has had a communal eating system since 1993, supplying homes and public buildings in the village. It wants to become self-sufficient in its supply of biomass and no longer dependent on the industry that feeds it. So the community asks itself how to do acceptable forestry on the Category 1 lands. This is Oujé-Bougoumou, the last Cree community to be included in the James Bay and Northern Quebec Agreement in 1989. There are 13 trap lines in total, but only 2 on the Category 1 lands. The area is about 167 square kilometers, so it's a relatively small area. For the project, we ask ourselves the question: how to develop a sustainable forest management strategy for the Oujé-Bougoumou Cree Nation's Category 1 lands, which would grant the social acceptance from community members. To answer that question, we identified 2 objectives. First, we had to identify issues in the co-management experience in the context of the Pays des Braves, the adapted forest regime, as perceived by the Cris. The aim was to avoid making the same mistakes and to settle the situation on Category 1 lands, since the community has full management of these lands. With that information, we proposed a Cris sustainable management framework that could grant the social license to operate of community members. The project was made by, for, and with the community of Oujé-Bougoumou. We used a qualitative method and a collaborative approach. We also used 2 techniques by objective. For the identification of the issues in the Pays des Braves, we did a documentation analysis through interviews with Cree trappers and on forestry issues in Waswanipi. We completed with the Oujé-Bougoumou's working group. For the framework, we mostly used a small working group, the research team, to create the framework in co-construction, and we completed by using documentation from Cree standards of Waswanipi and from projects in sustainable forest management on Iwichi. It's important to note that there's no validation yet with the community for the framework. Before going to the results, I want to make a quick summary of the Pays des Braves. The Pays des Braves is an agreement that was adopted in 2002 in response to dissatisfaction in the forest management. The adapted forest regime was created and brought new zonings, a maximum disturbance level, and a cutting method, mosaic, all of which were put in place to take a better account of the Cree way of life. However, there are elements of the agreement that were deemed insufficient by the Cris during the last 20 years of forest co-management. Here's the first result of the project, the 7 issues of the Petit Brave. Inadequate protection of wildlife habitats, mixed forest stands, key social ecological ecosystems too much disturbed, protected heritage sites of insufficient size, cutting levels too high using equivocal harvesting methods, too much road access to the territory, inadequate silviculture practices and cutting methods, and inadequate protective measures for riparian areas. However, considering the time we have left, I'm going to present just the last 2 ones. The size of riparian buffer strips is insufficient to protect wildlife habitats, heritage sites, and the activities of land users. Indeed, one of the interviews with the Tallyman by Tetelbaum and Lucier says that the current measures are still insufficient, even if they were improvements since 2002. The practices implemented overly artificialize the forest and do not sufficiently respect nature. Artificial reforestation methods and the excessive use of scarification on the territory are not appreciated or even tolerated by the Cris. In conclusion, all these issues lead us to believe that there is room for improvement, that measures have been put in place, but they are still insufficient to make an acceptable forestry. So what can we do on forest category 1 lands? To address these issues and to answer the guiding principles that we made in group, it is recommended to formulate a Cris sustainable management framework. This framework defines the major issues to be taken into account and will eventually be used to draw up the plan. Let's start with the Cris network. In December 2020, the governments of Quebec and the Cree Nation decided to protect more than 20% of the Inuit Bay territory. On the other hand, at the tribe line scale, averaging 812 square kilometers in Oujé-Bougoumou, there is a serious lack of protected areas. The sites of interest and biological refuges of the provincial component represent 3% of the protected territory, which is very little. As for the 25% territories, they are not protected areas. Development can still take place within them, and there are no conservation measures. To keep intact the territory and to maintain the naturalness, it is recommended that each trot line has its own social ecological Cree network whose territories would be excluded from timber production. The goal is to maintain the traditional activities of users and extended family members, conserve ecological and cultural zones, and protect important wildlife habitats. With this in mind, these 4 elements together are proposed. Inuit sites are translated as sites of Cree interest, those directly related to the Cree way of life. They have been chosen for the essential role for community members. Among these are the campsite, the cemetery or burial site, and the traditional sites. Aquatic ecosystems have always been of great importance to the Crees as they use them for food, transportation, and the way of life. They are also essential for many wildlife species, such as moose. The objective of protecting these areas is to promote landscape connectivity and biodiversity by creating corridors, maintain or improve moose habitats such as calving grounds, and maintain or improve the quality of water, fish, and aquatic habitats. Generally speaking, mixed stands are found in wildlife areas, 25% area, and are disturbed within them. This disturbs the moose, by the fact. On Category 1 lands, we suggest that these habitats are protected from all forestry activities, meaning no logging, to keep all mixed forests intact and protect moose yards. Heritage sites are similar to Inuit sites, but are distinguished by the tourism potential and recreational use. It is important to protect them to preserve the region's tourism potential, but also to enable the Crees to pursue their traditional activities. Concerning this section, The objective is to create wildlife habitat strategies to ensure the protection of the wildlife habitats and, by the same way, the Cris way of life. The most important thing is that we decided to use a holistic vision by basing the strategies on something understandable for the Cris, the species of interest. Unlike other strategies in place in EUICHI, this one is the first with an approach based on wildlife species. The wildlife habitat strategies are used to manage the territory in a landscape level. It means that they need to improve the connectivity between ecosystems for the moose, but also the spatial distribution of cutting blocks and the size are done on the Category 1 land scale. To manage the territory, we propose to separate the territory in two zones. The north, close to the Asinica Park and also more untouched, and the south, all around the village. But they are also the habitat of two important species for the Cris, the caribou in the north and the moose in the south. Each zone has a disturbance level to meet the needs of the community. For example, the south, where activities and development could take place, and the north, where restoration and protection could be applied. The idea behind this section was to meet the community's tourism needs while protecting the surrounding environment, as raised by the EU Planning Commission. Oujé-Bougoumou wants to pursue economic activities that are more environmentally friendly, more compatible with the Cris way of life than forestry, for example. We therefore propose to set up a visual development plan to properly integrate logging operations into the landscape, identifying areas of landscape interest and sensitive landscape that should be given special attention. Of course, a section of forest management is necessary. Indeed, we propose to adopt an ecological and sustainable forestry. We separated into three elements. First, ecological silviculture, where it is necessary to make an informed choice about which trees to harvest and plant to respect the naturalness of ecosystems. This also includes silvicultural practices that do not harm the Cris way of life or important wildlife species. Second, high naturalness to meet the community's need to follow Mother Nature's ecological process and avoid further environmental disturbance. Finally, ecological restoration to restore ecosystems and environments that have been disturbed in recent years and make them more natural and in relation with the Cris. Finally, we suggest the implementation of a strategic plan for the road network on Category 1 lands. All this with the goal to provide access to the territory for the Cris, limiting or avoiding the impact of new roads and reducing or preventing entry by non-natives. We also suggest road closures as applied to woodland caribou. In conclusion, the expected benefits are mostly for the Cris, as this project seeks to create a new version of the Pays Braves Agreement. In the province, there is also a need for forestry practices that culturally fit the way of life of Aboriginal communities, and that's why we propose a first version. Other Native communities could inspire them of our work in order to implement forestry practices that gains the social acceptance of their members on their own lands. Following my presentation, you might be curious as to when I plan to conclude the project. Well, after having to adapt the project because of the pandemic and also trying to communicate with the research team and the community during my maternity leave, and conciliating studies and family with no daycare, I'm trying to deposit a first version of my thesis this session. There would be a research report too. Thank you very much for your attention. Thanks to our partners, the Oujé-Bougoumou Cree Nation, the Société du Plan Nord, and the CRSH. A big thank you to Jean-Michel Beaudoin and Louis Bélanger from Laval University, Arthur Boson from OBCN, Rodney McDonald from Staccoon Enterprise, and Norman A. Wapachi from the CNG. Miigwech!